This is a very impressive thing, although not quite as exotic looking as some of the other engines and exotic cars from this era, the Ford Testarossa, the Lamborghini Countach, obviously because this wasn't designed by the Italians as some glorious V12. Nonetheless, this isn't a view you get very often, the Vector's 8-cylinder engine. Now, the other latchback here opens up the trunk. There's actually a small cargo area behind the engine compartment. You pull on this latch, and that unlatches the cargo area. You open it up, and you can see, well, calling it a cargo area is generous. It's very wide and very small, but you can get stuff in there if you want. Like, for instance, 2 baseball bats, 3 golf clubs, a ski. Now, next up, I want to move on to some other interesting items on the side of the Vector. I mentioned earlier that in back, there's no badging except for that twin turbo badge. Interestingly, it's the same deal in front. This car has no badge on its nose to let you know what it is, unlike basically every other car ever. The only real badging on the outside of this car is below the doors. It has this huge badge that says Vector W8 Twin Turbo. It is absolutely massive. I guess it makes up for the fact that there are no other emblems anywhere else on the car. You have one on the driver's side and one over on the passenger side. This is just one of the coolest car badges in the industry. I would love to just take this off and stick it up on my wall. I think that is so cool, and someone should put that back into production. But it is weird for a car that took a long time to get to market, a lot of hard work for the company that made it, that it doesn't have any other badges anywhere else. And next I'm moving on to a couple of other interesting things on the side of the car. One is the fuel door, which works in kind of an unusual way. You pull out this little tab, and then you twist it to the left to open the fuel door. You can also twist it to the right to close the fuel door, and of course there's a keyhole there, so you can lock it and prevent people from stealing fuel out of your Vector. And the most interesting thing to me about the fuel door is the fact that on the bottom it says blank U.S. gallons. And I guess the manufacturer of whatever the fuel door was going on was supposed to write how many U.S. gallons this vehicle could take. Vector, of course, did not do that, so instead it is still blank. Now, the other interesting thing on the outside of this car is the wheels. And they're interesting because this car has wheels on it, and yet here is another set of wheels in the owner's garage. There's a reason for this. When the owner of this car bought it, it had the standard stock original wheels on it, and in back it was a 315 width for a 16-inch wheel. And nobody made that size. The owner of this car got in touch with the original chief engineer from this car 30 years ago, and that guy made him a new set of wheels, except now 18 inches in size, and then it was possible to find a new tire in order to stick on his Vector. So these are not the original wheels, but they look basically identical in style to the original wheels. They just happen to be 2 inches bigger, so you can fit a modern, rational, normal tire on it. Personally, I just like the fact that the original chief engineer for this car is still around, and if you call him up, he'll make you a new set of Vector wheels, although presumably they aren't cheap. And next I'm moving further down the side of the Vector. Here you can see a couple more interesting items. One, you can now see the mirrors from the outside, and you can see how they're sort of integrated into the aerodynamics of the car. Often mirrors are sort of stuck on there and they screw with everything, but these almost look like they were intended to be part of the design from day one. And speaking of the window, you can now easily see from this angle just how insane the windows in this car are. You don't just have this cool window that slides open with the power window button, but you can also see the window is curved in the middle. You have a flat plane and then you can turn and go in a different direction down the door. This is a really, really unusual window design, and I would not want to be responsible for breaking one of these windows because I suspect you will never find a replacement. Now next we move further forward in the Vector, and from this angle you can see one of its very craziest details. I'm talking about the windshield wipers and the fact that there are 3 of them. This car has 1 windshield, 2 seats, 3 windshield wipers. You have 2 on the side and 1 in the middle.
Ano ini sa live ini?
You will not see this
Sa
on any
live.
other car. And if you've ever wanted to know how these 3 windshield wipers in your Vector operate, well, here you go. Now, Now, next up we move on to the front end in the Vector, and from your angle you can see just how crazy this car looks from the front, how flat and low and wide this particular perspective is. It really is unbelievable to see this on a car, but I will cover the styling in a little bit more depth shortly. What I want to talk about here in the front are two other interesting parts of the Vector, starting with the headlights. Now you can see in this position they are closed. A lot of cars from this era have pop-up headlights, but not the Vector. Instead, you turn on the headlights with that button in the interior, and then the covers pop down. Take a look at that again. You can see that the covers kind of go down into the body of the car, and then the lights are on, and that's how the pop-down headlights work in the Vector. Now, obviously, if you turn the headlights off, the opposite happens. The lights turn off, and the covers go back up and go back into this position, so they're covering the headlights for a more aerodynamic look. Now, another interesting item in the front of the Vector is this panel here, which is unusually flimsy. Alright, to open this panel, there's a little lever that you can in the driver's panel way down there, and then it opens to this point. Then there's a little latch you pull here, and you can kind of open this up, but as you can see, it's oddly flimsy. When I open it, it feels like it could pop off at any second. It's a very unusual thing because obviously this car is designed for high speeds and you expect everything to be completely stuck down in place, but this panel certainly is not more flimsy than you would think. Now, up front here you have two things. You have a fan, which a lot of exotic cars have, for cooling obviously, and you have another storage compartment, which is actually pretty good. Most exotic cars that have a rear storage compartment figure, well, we've gone far enough and they don't bother trying to integrate one into the front, but Vector did, and this is actually a pretty deep additional storage compartment for extra practicality. Now, once you put your thing back here, close this flimsy panel once again, lock it down in place, and it's good to go. And one other interesting item worth noting up front, again, lighting related, I want to show you the headlights. You might be wondering, where exactly are the turn signals, since you clearly can't see them from your angle? The answer is they're under here, the furthest frontmost part of the car, sort of integrated into what I guess would be the bumper. That's where you have the turn signals. You can see with the hazard lights on, probably not the most visible turn signals in the world, but hey, at least it has them. And next up, another interesting Vector item, that would be right here, this label in the driver's door jamb. This is the label that says this vehicle conforms to all applicable federal motor vehicle standards. Basically, the label that says this car is certified for sale to the public. It must have been a crazy celebration at Vector when the government told them they were okay to put this label on this car. It's a pretty big deal. And frankly, I think Vector did a pretty fantastic job with that whole car and jet fighter plane mashup, because for our last perk and feature of the Vector, we have to talk about its design. And I think this car looks most insane next to a normal car. This is a normal, boring, mid-size luxury crossover, the kind you see in massive numbers on the streets of wherever you live. And this is the Vector. Now, the Vector looks pretty crazy by itself, but when you put it next to a car that is rational, you realize just how crazy this looks. The Lamborghini Countach is a crazy-looking car. The Vector clearly is crazier. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter what angle you stage this comparison from, the Vector always looks like it is from a completely different planet. The Countach, the Diablo, they're insane, but they still look like cars. This thing just doesn't. It really is otherworldly. You're driving along, it looks like a low-flying plane, an alien spaceship, something totally nuts. And so, those are the perks and features of the Vector W8. But I have to stop it there. This car is so insane that this video has run almost 40 minutes, which I found is realistically the limit of what people are willing to watch on YouTube. But I didn't want to cut anything out. I did drive the Vector W8, and I'm going to show you my driving experience and the Doug score tomorrow on my second channel, More Doug the Euro. And when that video goes live, I will link it in the description below this video, so you can check it out there.
睡觉了。好大呀，好高。Ngajian macam orang lama dia.
This is a 2016 Ford F650. Sorry, excuse me for a second. This is a 2016 Ford F650, and it is the ultimate pickup truck. You've heard of supercars, of course. Well, this is a super truck, one of the largest pickup trucks on the planet. And today, I'm going to review it. I borrowed this F650 from CNC Motors, which is an exotic car dealership here in Southern California that has an amazing inventory of amazing cars. Everything from million-dollar exotics to old cars to, well, weird stuff like this. They have one of the most incredible showrooms of any car dealership on the planet, and you can check them out by clicking the link in the description below. Now, you surely know the Ford F-Series, which is the best-selling vehicle in America. Most people buy the Ford F-150, which is plenty capable for almost all needs. If you need to tow or haul something specific, maybe you upgrade to the F-250. And if you really want to pull something huge, then you get an F-350. And the vast majority of consumers think that that's where the Ford F-Series lineup ends. But it doesn't, because this is an F650. In fact, the Ford F-Series lineup goes all the way up to the F750, but most of these higher numbered trucks are typically commercial vehicles like tow trucks or ambulances or dump trucks. But not this one. This is just a regular old pickup truck, except massive. Now, Ford doesn't sell it this way. They sell the F650 with a cab and then just a basic bare strip chassis, they call it. And then this company called Super Trucks converts it into a pickup with luxury features and a pickup truck bed. Now, the F650 weighs 10,000 pounds before that conversion. So this thing really is huge. Fortunately, it has a good engine to handle all that power. It's got a 6.7-liter Power Stroke V8, and it's got 330 horsepower and about 750 pound-feet of torque. So anyway, today I'm going to review the F650. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of it and show you all the interesting quirks and features of the ultimate pickup truck. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the F650, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/overseas. All right, I'm going to start the...
Initiate retreat. Initiate retreat.
Spicy, juicy, satisfaction. Now with a lemony twist. Spicy lemon chicken neck deluxe. Fire it up with McDonald's spicy cakes. Order make delivery or drive-thru. Easy.
这些年来，吃遍了大街小巷的美食，家里的饭菜仍然是最温暖的味道。父母年龄渐长了，能给父母最好的礼物，除了陪伴，还有健康。McCall Plus 含乳鸡蛋白和大豆蛋白，重要营养素结合维他3和6，能补充营养，帮助增强体力，同时有助降低胆固醇。身体的致癌，享有 McCall Plus 的8大益处。
Quirks and features of the F650 with simply getting inside. And as you can see, this is a truck with a staircase because it is massive. But there is a problem with the staircase. The lowest stair is still really high up. You can see I have to lift my leg really far. And if you're like old or small, you might not be able to do this. So even with the staircase, it's hard to get in. Fortunately, they've thought of that. You open the door, and another stair deploys, so now you have an even larger staircase. But this is more than enough to be able to climb step 1, step 2, step 3 into the F650. And then you're finally in. Same deal when you get out. Start here at the top, step 1, step 2, step 3. You're out, you shut the door, and then the additional stair retracts back into the view. And it's worth noting that folding stair isn't just to the driver's side of this truck. They have the same thing on the passenger side and the back. You open the rear door, and once again, the stair automatically extends out, and then you climb on in to get into the F650, and then you're in. And again, same deal to get out. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and only then are you comfortably out of the F650. And next up, I'm not quite done with this staircase to get into the F650, because this isn't just a staircase, it's also a fuel tank. If you look down at the back end, you'll see a big cap on top of it, and that's when you stick diesel fuel in this thing. And there are 2 of these. There's one giant fuel tank on the driver's side that includes these steps, and then there's one giant fuel tank on the passenger side that includes these steps. So this truck has 2 fuel tanks for a total of 115 gallons of fuel. At the current price of diesel, filling up this truck is something like $400 or $500. But such is the price you pay to drive the ultimate pickup truck. But down the side of this truck, it isn't all fuel tanks. In fact, this is a cargo compartment. You open it up, turn this little latch, and then you can see you can stick in some cargo in here. And in fact, same thing on the other side, over on the passenger side of the truck, in the same spot, there's another cargo compartment just like this one that you can open up and put stuff in, which I think is actually a pretty good idea, because otherwise this would just be wasted space. And one of the big problems with pickup trucks is there's no trunk. You can't lock anything, but with this, you can. You'll notice there's a separate key lock. You can stick your stuff in here and no one will get through. And next we move on to the bed, which is rather ridiculous. Now, I say that because, like I mentioned before, Ford sells the F650 as a stripped chassis, which means it has a cab, and then back here just chassis rails, and you can add whatever you want in the back. Now, most companies add like a tow truck or a dump truck or an ambulance box, but in order to make this into the ultimate pickup, Super Trucks just add the regular bed from the Ford F350 dually. It matches, and pretty much that's all they have available today. But this creates some problems. I will start with the fuel door. Now, I showed you earlier how you add fuel to the giant fuel tanks in here, but the F350 bed comes with a fuel door when you buy it. So, you open up this fuel door and there's just holes there. It looks absolutely ridiculous, stupid, unfinished, but that's just the reality when you stick on a bed from a different vehicle. And next up, we move on to the next problem created by the bed, and that would be the problem with the tire. Now, the regular F350 uses normal street car tires, obviously huge ones, but they work for normal road-going vehicles. But the F650 uses these massive commercial-grade tires you see on like a crane or a dump truck. And so, these tires don't fit under this wheel well because they were never designed to go here. So if you actually look at the wheel well, you'll see the top of the tire fits into the bottom of the wheel well, but if it went any higher, it would cut off the tire and it wouldn't actually be able to turn. And so, for the first time in the entire history of one of my reviews, I can confidently say that this wheel well is purely here for decoration, since it doesn't really have any function, since it can't actually contain the tire. And then we move on to the most serious problem with the bed, and that would be its usefulness. What do you need a pickup truck bed for? To put stuff in. Well, you can do that in this truck, but the problem is, when you drop the bed, it comes up to my stomach, or even a little bit higher. There's no way you could ever get something into this bed, especially anything heavy, if you wanted to carry it around. So you have this massive truck with this incredibly capable chassis, and you can't even put anything back here in order to drive it anywhere, because nobody can get into this bed. That is probably the biggest bed-related flaw. It's almost like the entire bed is there just for aesthetic style reasons.
Nothing can stop my justice.
Parodontax, the toothpaste that helps stop and prevent bleeding gums. If your gums bleed when you brush, you may have gum disease, and the clog could be taken to much worse. Bad breath. Then over time, receding gums. And eventually, tooth loss. Help stop the clog of gum disease with Parodontax toothpaste. It helps stop and prevent bleeding gums. Leave bleeding gums behind. Parodontax.
But anyway, speaking of the bed, you want to actually be able to get something in here, you would find that it's just a pretty standard Ford F350 Super Duty bed. Nothing unusual, nothing particularly special in the bed of the 650. But while the inside of the bed may not be particularly interesting, there are quite a few other interesting quirks and features on the outside of the F650. I'm going to start with the mud flaps. This thing has such massively huge that it has to have massively huge mud flaps. These look like they come right off a semi-truck. They are really intense. In fact, the mud flaps are so huge, they have their own turn signals. You put on the turn signal, and one specifically lights up on the top of the mud flaps. And speaking of excessive lighting, that's a bit of a theme on this particular F650. When you put on the turn signals, 4 separate signal lights light up in the back of this truck on either side. You have the one in the mud flaps, and there's one right below the bed. You have one in the normal taillight brake light housing, and then you have one at the top of the cab in the back. So there are many different ways this truck lets you know that it's changing lanes or turning from the back. And the theme of this truck being a little over-eager to let you know that it's changing lanes continues down the side, where you also have an enormous number of turn signals. You have one on the front fender, you have one in the side mirror, and then you have 4 separate LED turn signals on each side under the doors, letting other drivers know that you're changing lanes. This is not due to any regulation. It's clear to me that this truck was just owned by like an LED lighting enthusiast who wanted a lot of different lights whenever anything happened. But probably the most insane exterior feature of this truck is the front end design. You look at this front end and it's clear that this is Ford's giant commercial vehicles. This doesn't look anything like a regular pickup. And I guess that's why people buy it. Their neighbor just got an F350, they want to show them up, so they get this. And no one will ever confuse this for any regular pickup truck when you see the front end of this thing. It is just ridiculously huge. Especially huge and massive in this truck is this giant front bumper, which sticks out like 1.5 feet beyond the front of the trunk. It's chrome on the front, this matte black on the top, and I can completely sit on it, which isn't something I can do in most of the cars I review. I'm not sitting on a lot of Pagani wide-rub bumpers, but you can do it in this thing because it's just so tough and massive and insane. It's worth noting this bumper will also push anything out of the way. And since we're up front, we might as well talk engine. Like I mentioned, this is Ford's 6.7-liter Power Stroke Turbo Diesel V8, 330 horsepower, about 750 pound-feet of torque, pretty healthy numbers. But my favorite thing is how you access the engine. There is no little latch you pull in the driver footwell. Instead, you walk over to the passenger side and undo this little strap. Then you come over to the driver's side, you undo the same strap, and then it's all about brute strength and force in order to get this absolutely massive hood up. But once you do, you can see the engine, although it's still about 6.5 feet on the ground, so it's not like you're going to have all that much access. And by the way, since I'm up front, it's worth noting that the massive LED lighting theme of this truck continues up front. You can see there are 4 separate LEDs in this giant front bumper. Now, you turn these on with the 4 auxiliary switches in the cabin. If you press them all to turn them all on, you will turn on the lights in front, all 4 of them, the 2 circles and the 2 in the middle, well. And you will also turn on all the lights in the back. There is a giant LED above the bed that goes on, and then there are 2 more LEDs in the rear bumper. Again, I'm not sure what the obsession was with LEDs, but when they're all on, this truck is very unmistakable. And next we move on to the inside of the F650. And by the way, my camera and tripod is as high as it possibly goes right now. This setup has worked for every other car I've ever reviewed, but it is not tall enough for the F650. And it looks like you're like a little puppy looking into a car. Come play with me. But anyway, moving on to the interior. Now, the interior here is not as interesting as the exterior, mostly because this is effectively just a regular F-Series Super Duty truck cab put on this ridiculous body. So there's nothing particularly interesting or weird, but there are some quirks and features worth noting, the biggest of which is the transmission situation. This truck has an automatic like you'd expect, but it doesn't have park. Take a look in the gauge cluster. You can see all the other gears are there, but there's no P. Instead, in order to park this truck, you put it in neutral, and then there's this giant floor-mounted parking brake. You pull that, and then the truck is parked, like a manual transmission car or an exotic car with like a dual clutch or an F1 Ferrari transmission. I have never seen this in any other vehicle, but it's in this one. And next up, there are some other interesting quirks and features in here worth noting. For example, in the center control stack, there's a